I moved into a duplex in the winter of 2022 after my relationship ended, and I needed a place fast. It wasn't anything fancy, an older building on the edge of town, next to a wooded lot, the kind of place that looks a little forgotten. The rent was cheap, the landlord didn't ask a lot of questions, and it was available immediately. At the time, that was all I cared about. The duplex was split vertically. The left half was mine, the right half belonged to a man I never actually met. I knew someone lived there because I'd hear the occasional door slam or muffled footsteps through the thin walls. But whoever it was kept to themselves. At first, I liked the solitude. After everything I'd just gone through, it felt good to be somewhere no one bothered me. The first few weeks were uneventful. I worked, came home, made simple meals, and spent most of my evenings on the couch watching TV. Sometimes I'd hear my neighbor moving around late at night, but it was never loud enough to be a real problem, until it started getting weird. The first thing I noticed was small, barely there stuff, like the back door to the shared backyard being slightly open when I knew I had closed it, or the bathroom window being unlatched when I always kept it locked because of the draft. At first, I chalked it up to me being absent-minded. I wasn't sleeping well, I was stressed from the breakup and adjusting to a new place. It was easy to dismiss. But then there were nights when I'd wake up around 3 or 4 in the morning to the sound of tapping. It wasn't from the walls. It sounded like it was coming from inside the house. Light, rhythmic tapping like fingernails against wood. I'd sit up in bed, heart pounding, straining my ears, and it would stop. Dead silence, thick and heavy. One night I was so on edge that I got out of bed and walked through the entire house. I checked every closet, every door, every window. Nothing was out of place, except for one thing. The tiny closet under the stairs, the one I never used, was cracked open. I was almost certain I never touched that door since I moved in. Still, I closed it without thinking too much about it and went back to bed. But after that night, I started noticing other strange things. My kitchen chairs would be slightly pulled out when I woke up. The light above the sink would be on when I came home, even though I swore I turned it off before leaving. And always that feeling of being watched. Not just once in a while, constantly, especially at night. I tried to tell myself it was just nerves, maybe even mild paranoia. But it kept getting worse. One night, after a particularly long shift, I got home around midnight. The second I walked through the door, I knew something was wrong. It was freezing inside, way colder than it should have been. And it wasn't the usual winter cold. It was this heavy, still cold, like the air itself wasn't moving. I checked the thermostat. Normal. I walked room to room, flipping on lights, checking windows and doors. Everything seemed fine. When I got to the living room, I stopped. The closet under the stairs, the one I always kept shut, was wide open. I froze, staring at the dark mouth of it. The light from the hallway barely touched the inside, but I could see enough to know there was nothing immediately there. I closed it again, this time pushing a heavy chair against it. I didn't know why, but it made me feel better. Later that night, I was in bed, trying to sleep when I heard it. Footsteps, not from the neighboring unit, not from outside. Inside my house, downstairs, soft, deliberate footsteps, moving slowly from the living room toward the bottom of the stairs. I sat up in bed, my entire body tense, straining to hear. They stopped at the foot of the stairs. I waited, clutching my phone in my hand, ready to call someone, anyone, but something told me not to make a sound. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20. Finally, I forced myself to get up. I opened my bedroom door just a crack and looked down the dark staircase. Nothing. I crept downstairs, heart hammering, and turned on every light as I went. There was no one, no sign of a break-in. Nothing. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I asked my landlord about the neighbor. I thought maybe he had a key and somehow got into my side by mistake. The landlord looked at me confused and said, "There's no one living in the other unit right now. Hasn't been for months." I just stared at him, unable to process what he said. I had heard noises, footsteps, doors, moving around, almost every day. He insisted the place was empty. I could even check the other side if I wanted. So I did. That afternoon, the landlord unlocked the door to the other unit and let me inside. It was empty, dusty, cold, clearly untouched for a long time. No furniture, no signs of anyone staying there. I felt sick. The landlord must have seen the look on my face because he said, "You know, the guy who lived here before you, he left real sudden too. Didn't even take all his stuff." He pointed to the basement door. "Some of it's still down there if you want to look." I didn't want to, but some horrible curiosity made me do it anyway. We opened the basement door. The light switch didn't work, so the landlord handed me a little flashlight from his truck. I went down the stairs alone. The basement smelled musty, like damp concrete and old wood. The beam from the flashlight barely cut through the darkness. I swung it around and then froze. In the far corner of the basement was an old mattress, stained and sagging. Next to it, piles of blankets and trash. And scrawled across the concrete wall above it were words, over and over again, scratched into the wall with something sharp. "I'm still here." I backed away slowly, feeling like if I turned my back, something would grab me. I got out of that basement, out of that duplex, and moved back in with my brother the very next day. I didn't even bother to give notice. I left half my stuff behind. The landlord never contacted me. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the sounds I heard, the footsteps, the tapping, the feeling of being watched. And I wonder how long someone, or something, had been living there without me knowing. Or worse, maybe they still are. It happened on a Thursday night around midnight in late 2015. I had just gotten off a late shift at the diner I worked at, and my ride had bailed on me at the last minute. It wasn't the first time, so I wasn't too surprised. My apartment was only a couple miles away, so I figured I'd just walk. It was a cool, crisp night in northern Ohio, and the streets were almost completely empty. I actually liked the quiet sometimes. It felt like the world was holding its breath. But that night, it felt different. About half a mile into my walk, I noticed a car parked on the side of the road. An old, beat-up station wagon, like the kind you'd see in an 80s movie. Its headlights were off, but I could tell someone was inside because the engine was still running. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone was just taking a break or waiting for someone. But as I passed by, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was inside was watching me. I kept my head down and walked a little faster. A couple minutes later, I turned onto a side street, a narrow stretch with no street lights and tall chain-link fences on either side. That's when I heard the car door slam shut behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. I just walked faster. I could hear footsteps behind me now, heavy, crunching the gravel. Still, I told myself, maybe it's just someone else walking home. But then I heard the unmistakable sound of a second set of footsteps. 2 people, following me. I glanced over my shoulder. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of 2 figures, both wearing dark hoodies, their faces hidden. They weren't just walking, they were gaining on me. That's when I broke into a full sprint. I ran as fast as I could, cutting through alleys and backyards, trying to lose them. At one point, I heard one of them shout something, but I didn't catch what it was. I wasn't going to stop to find out. After what felt like forever, I ducked behind a dumpster in a narrow alley, trying to catch my breath and listen. At first, there was only silence. Then I heard it. A low, rhythmic tapping sound, like someone dragging something metallic along the chain-link fence nearby. I crouched there, heart hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. I peeked out just enough to see one of the figures walking slowly past, dragging a long metal pipe along the fence. The other one was trailing a few feet behind, looking side to side like he was searching for something or someone. They stopped right near the dumpster. I held my breath, terrified they'd hear me. Then one of them said in a voice so casual it made my skin crawl, "Come on out. We just want to play." I squeezed my eyes shut, praying they'd leave. Minutes passed. Finally, I heard their footsteps move away, fading into the distance. I stayed hidden for at least another half hour, too scared to move. When I finally got the courage to step out, I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I headed toward the 24-hour gas station a few blocks over, hoping there'd be people, lights, anything. As I neared the station, I felt a sudden wave of relief. There were a few cars at the pumps and the store lights were bright. I thought I was safe. But as I got closer, my stomach dropped. Parked on the far side of the lot, half hidden behind a semi-truck, was that same beat-up station wagon. And standing next to it, those two figures, watching me. They didn't move. They just stood there, staring. I ran into the gas station and told the clerk everything, begging him to call the police. He did, and while we waited, I peeked out the window. The car was gone. Just gone. When the cops showed up, I told them what happened. They looked around, took a report, but honestly, I could tell they thought I was exaggerating or just tired. They offered to give me a ride home, and I took it. I didn't want to be outside any longer than I had to. When I got to my apartment, everything seemed quiet. The lot was empty. The building was dark. The cop waited until I was inside before pulling away, and I made sure to deadbolt the door and double-check the windows. I stayed up all night, too wired to sleep, jumping at every little noise. Around 3 a.m., I finally started to doze off on the couch. That's when I heard it. A soft knock at my front door, 3 slow taps, then silence. I froze. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Another knock, louder this time. And then a voice, muffled but unmistakable. "We saw you." I didn't dare go to the window. I didn't answer. I just sat there, heart pounding, waiting for it to stop. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the knocking stopped. The next morning, there was no sign anyone had been there, no footprints, no damage to the door. Nothing. I reported it to the landlord and the police again, but there wasn't much they could do. No witnesses, no security cameras, no license plate. A few weeks later, I broke my lease and moved out. I didn't care about losing the deposit. I just needed to get away. To this day, I have no idea who they were, or what they wanted, or how they knew where I lived. All I know is if your gut tells you you're being watched, run. My name's Brandon, and up until a few months ago, my life was boring in the best way. I lived with my wife, Claire, in a modest house on a quiet street where the loudest thing you ever heard at night was someone's sprinkler system kicking on. We both worked 9-to-5 jobs, ate dinner together every night, and fell asleep watching TV on the couch most evenings. It was the kind of life you don't think twice about until something reminds you just how fragile normalcy is. It started on a Tuesday, completely uneventful like most. Claire had stayed late at work for some team thing, and I was home alone. I heated up some leftovers, fed the dog, and settled into the couch to watch a basketball game. Around 9:15, I got a text. It was from a number I didn't recognize. It just said, "Are you alone right now?" I laughed it off at first, figured it was a wrong number. I didn't reply. A few minutes later, another text came through. "Look outside." At this point, I paused the TV. I got up, walked to the front window, and peeked out. There was no one there. The porch light illuminated the yard and the empty sidewalk. Maybe it was one of my buddies playing a prank. I texted back, "Very funny," and left it at that. Claire got home around 10 o'clock. I didn't even mention the texts. It felt stupid, and nothing else weird happened that night. But the next night, it escalated. Around 11:30, after we'd both been asleep for a while, the doorbell rang. You know that feeling when you're jolted awake and it takes a second for reality to catch up? That was me. Claire sat up immediately, whispering, "Did you hear that?" We both shuffled out of bed. I grabbed my phone, but there were no missed calls or texts. We looked through the peephole, but there was no one on the porch. I opened the door cautiously, and that's when I saw it. On the welcome mat was an old, beat-up Polaroid photograph. I bent down and picked it up. The picture showed the outside of our house, taken from the sidewalk. It was grainy and dark, but clearly our house. Our cars in the driveway, our porch light glowing. Claire whispered, "Brandon, is this a joke?" I didn't know what to say. We didn't sleep much that night. The next day at work, I kept checking my phone, half expecting more weird messages, but nothing came through. I almost convinced myself it had been some dumb teenagers messing around. Almost. Thursday night, I made sure the front and back doors were locked, windows shut, curtains drawn. Claire suggested calling the police, but what would we say? Someone rang our doorbell and left an old photo. Even if they sent someone out, there wasn't much they could do. At 2:17 a.m., the landline rang. We barely even used it. Claire and I shot awake and for a few seconds just stared at each other, frozen. I answered it. A man's voice, low and deliberate, said, "Nice place. Shame if something happened to it." Then he hung up. Claire was crying now, full-on shaking. I tried to keep it together, told her it had to be some sick prank, but my hands were trembling too. We called the police. 2 officers came, took our statements, and drove around the neighborhood, but didn't find anything suspicious. They offered to have a patrol car swing by a few times during the night, but honestly, it didn't make us feel any safer. The next day, we bought a security system. Cameras, alarms, the works. We armed the system religiously every night, double-checked the locks 3 times. For about a week, nothing happened. Life almost returned to normal. Then one night, while watching TV, we got a notification on the security app. Motion detected front porch. I pulled up the feed immediately. There was a man standing there, not moving, facing the door. He was wearing a hooded jacket, his head low, hands in his pockets. We couldn't see his face. I froze. Claire was whispering, "Call the police, call the police." But before I could even move, the man raised his hand and waved at the camera, a slow, deliberate wave. Then he turned and walked off into the night. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They checked the footage, but said there wasn't enough detail to identify him. No plates, no clear facial features. We seriously considered moving after that night, but we didn't want to let fear push us out of our home. We installed even more cameras, floodlights, motion sensors. We barely slept, jumping at every creak and groan the house made. Then came the last incident. About a month later, Claire and I were both off work for a 3-day weekend. We decided to take a mini trip to her parents' house about 2 hours away. Before we left, I set the security system and made sure the cameras were recording. When we got back Sunday evening, everything looked fine. The house was exactly how we left it. But when I checked the security footage, my stomach dropped. Around midnight, the first night we were gone, the cameras caught someone entering the backyard. Not through the gate. They climbed the fence. And it wasn't just anyone. It was someone wearing my face. They were wearing a cheap rubber mask, molded to look exactly like me. Same hair, same beard, even the same clothes I often wore. It was horrifying, like looking at a twisted version of myself. This thing walked right up to the back door. It stared straight into the camera, lifted its hand and pointed directly at the lens. Then it just stood there, for hours, not moving. At 5:07 a.m., it finally turned and climbed back over the fence. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen, but the violation was so much worse than if someone had broken a window or trashed the place. It was psychological, a message. Claire and I moved out 2 weeks later. We never figured out who it was or why they chose us. The police didn't have answers. The new owners of that house? I wonder if anything's happened to them yet. Every now and then, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that footage. That thing wearing my face, standing there, waiting. And I wonder if, somewhere out there, it's still looking for us. Back in 2018, I took a solo trip out to a remote national forest in the Northwest. I had heard about an abandoned ranger station deep in the woods, the kind of place that was technically off limits, but people still occasionally hiked out to. I had been looking for something adventurous to do for months, and after reading a few old forum posts about it, I decided to make it my weekend plan. The drive took me nearly 4 hours from the nearest town. Once I was there, I pulled off onto this small, overgrown service road that led deeper into the forest. I knew from the scattered directions I found online that I'd have to hike a few miles after the road ended. I parked in a clearing that looked barely wide enough for my car, grabbed my backpack with all my gear, and started hiking in. The forest felt different than any I'd been in before. The trees were massive and dense, blocking out a lot of the sky, and the ground was soft with layers of old pine needles. There wasn't an official trail, just faint markers carved into trees every now and then. I had my handheld GPS, though, so I wasn't too worried. It took me about 3 hours of steady hiking before I finally saw it. The ranger station. It was a 2-story wooden structure, weathered and leaning slightly, tucked into a clearing that was almost completely swallowed up by the forest around it. The roof had caved in on one side, but the front porch and main level still looked intact enough to stay in for the night. I approached carefully, checking the wood with my boot before putting my full weight on it. Everything creaked and groaned, but it held. Inside was musty and dark even during the day. There was a main room with a rusted stove in the corner, a broken table, and some old storage lockers against the far wall. A staircase hugged the side of the room, leading up to what was left of the second floor, but it looked way too unstable to even try. I set up my sleeping bag on the floor near the stove, made a quick meal on my camp stove, and sat out on the porch to watch the sun go down. As the light faded, the forest around me got quieter. No wind, no birds, no rustling, just this thick silence that felt unnatural. A little after dark, as I was sitting on the porch, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Down past the tree line, maybe 100 yards away, there was a flicker of light. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting to the dark, but it kept coming back. This dim, almost reddish glow moving slowly between the trees. It wasn't the clean beam of a flashlight. It looked more like firelight, swaying and dancing through the forest. My first thought was that it was someone with a torch, or maybe a campfire in the distance, but it didn't feel right. There wasn't any crackling sound or smoke. I watched it for a long time, frozen on the porch. It never came closer, but it never really moved away either. Just stayed out there, shifting behind the trees. After about 20 minutes, it simply faded out, like someone had put it out. I went inside then, bolted the old door as best I could, and tried to shake off the uneasiness. I reminded myself that the forest was huge. It could have been another camper, or even some sort of natural phenomenon. It wasn't necessarily anything bad, but deep down, something about it had me on edge. I climbed into my sleeping bag and turned off my lantern, leaving myself in total darkness. I laid there for what felt like hours, every little noise in the wood making my heart jump. Eventually, I must have drifted off. I woke up suddenly to the sound of the front door creaking. Not the soft groaning it did earlier from the wind. This was deliberate, slow, like someone was pushing it open just enough to slip through. I stayed completely still, my heart hammering in my chest. I was tucked in a corner of the room in deep shadow, so I hoped whoever it was wouldn't see me immediately. I didn't dare turn on my light. For what felt like forever, there was no sound. Then, slow, deliberate footsteps on the wooden floor. They were heavy, dragging almost, like whoever it was didn't lift their feet all the way as they walked. I could barely make out a shape moving across the room. A hunched figure wearing what looked like a long, tattered coat. They moved toward the lockers, their back turned to me. I couldn't see their face, and honestly, I didn't want to. I debated whether to stay hidden and hope they left, or try to sneak out. But before I could decide, the figure stopped moving. Then, in a voice that was little more than a dry whisper, it said, "I know you're here." I felt pure terror freeze me in place. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I thought maybe if I stayed completely still, they wouldn't find me. The figure turned slowly, scanning the room. I saw a glimpse of their face in the moonlight spilling through a broken window. It didn't look right. Their skin looked stretched, their mouth too wide, eyes black and sunken. Then they started walking straight toward me. Without thinking, I grabbed my bag and ran for the back door, slamming my shoulder into it until the rotten wood gave way. I sprinted into the trees, not daring to look back. I ran blindly, branches slashing at my arms and face, stumbling through the dark. Behind me, I heard the heavy, dragging steps again, faster now, closer. I didn't stop until I was deep enough into the woods that I couldn't hear anything but my own ragged breathing. I crouched down behind a fallen tree and stayed there, straining my ears for any sound. After what felt like forever, I heard it. The same reddish light I saw earlier, glowing between the trees. Only now it was closer, and it wasn't alone. More lights flickering and swaying, coming from all directions. I realized they weren't carrying torches. The light was coming from them, from their bodies. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I forced myself to move, checking my GPS as quietly as I could. I backtracked toward my car, taking the long way to avoid the lights. It took me most of the night, but by some miracle, I made it back to the road just as the first light of dawn was breaking. I didn't even stop to catch my breath, just jumped into my car, locked the doors, and sped away. I never went back to that forest. I tried researching the ranger station later, but couldn't find much. Just a few mentions of hikers going missing in the area decades ago. Some said the station was cursed, that something was left behind there after the rangers abandoned it. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't want to know. All I know is something in those woods didn't want me there, and next time I might not be so lucky to get away. I had been driving for hours by the time I pulled off onto the old dirt road. It wasn't planned. I just needed to stretch my legs, maybe find somewhere to rest for the night. I didn't even know where the road led. It just seemed quiet, tucked away from everything. After about 10 minutes of slow driving, the trees thinned out, and I found an abandoned campground. It was just a clearing with a few rotting picnic tables and an old fire pit filled with ashes long gone cold. It was perfect, quiet, empty. I figured I'd stay a few hours, maybe until sunrise. I parked the car facing the woods and got out. The air was colder here, and even though it was still early evening, the sky looked darker than it should have. I walked around the clearing for a bit, just taking it in. Everything was still. No wind, no birds, no sounds at all except the occasional crack of a stick somewhere deep in the woods. I told myself it was just animals. As the sky grew darker, I built a small fire from some dry sticks lying around. I didn't really plan on sleeping. I just wanted a place to sit and warm up before getting back on the road. I ate a granola bar from my bag and leaned back against my car, staring into the flames. Maybe an hour passed before I first noticed it. It was small, a flicker of movement at the tree line. I thought it was just my imagination. I stared harder into the dark, trying to focus past the firelight, but saw nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching. I kept telling myself it was just a deer or some other animal, but after a few minutes I heard it. Footsteps, slow, heavy, crunching in the dead leaves just beyond where I could see. I stood up quickly, looking out into the woods, but still saw nothing. I called out, "Hello?" just to break the tension. No answer, just silence. I sat back down, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. Maybe the long drive had me on edge. I checked my phone. No service. Of course, I told myself I'd stay by the fire until it burned down and then leave. But as I sat there, I noticed something else. There were faint shapes moving between the trees, not walking, swaying, back and forth, like they were hanging from the branches or maybe just floating slightly above the ground. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, but every time I looked directly at one, it would stop moving. I rubbed my eyes and tried to focus. The fire popped loudly, making me jump. When I looked back at the trees, there was someone standing there. They were right at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the dark. I couldn't make out any features, just a pale face and dark, loose clothing. They didn't move. They didn't say anything, just stood there, facing me. My heart was pounding. I backed slowly toward my car, not taking my eyes off them. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw another figure on the opposite side of the clearing, and another behind me. 3 people, surrounding the campground. None of them moved closer, but they didn't back away either. They just stood there, still as statues, barely visible except for the faint glow of the fire on their faces. I yanked open the door to my car and climbed in, slamming it shut. I locked the doors immediately and just sat there, staring out at the woods. I couldn't see them anymore from inside the car. I didn't know if that was better or worse. I debated turning the headlights on. Maybe I'd scare them off. But something about that felt wrong, like it would provoke them. Instead, I just sat there, frozen, waiting. Minutes dragged by. The fire burned lower. The darkness outside the car grew heavier. And then, slowly, the car started to shake. At first, it was so subtle I thought it was just me trembling. But it got stronger. The whole car was rocking side to side, like something was pushing it. I turned the key and started the engine. Headlights burst through the dark, sweeping over the trees. There was no one there, not a single person. I floored it, kicking up dirt and gravel as I sped back down that narrow road, back toward the highway. My heart was hammering in my chest. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I drove for maybe 15 minutes before I finally started to calm down. I found the main road again and kept driving, trying to put as much distance between me and that place as possible. But then, my headlights caught something on the side of the road up ahead. At first, I thought it was just an animal, something small, hunched over. But as I got closer, I realized it was a person. No, multiple people, standing together at the edge of the woods, watching the road. Their heads snapped toward me as I passed. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. But a few miles later, I saw them again. Closer this time, standing directly in the road. I swerved hard, barely missing them. I glanced in the rearview mirror just long enough to see them vanish back into the trees. It didn't even look like they were walking, more like they were being pulled backward by something. I kept driving. I didn't stop again until I reached a gas station in some town hours away. I must have looked insane, dirty, shaking, wide-eyed. But the woman behind the counter didn't ask any questions. I stayed there until sunrise. I never found that dirt road again. No matter how much I looked, I checked maps, even asked a few locals, but nobody knew anything about an abandoned campground out that way. Sometimes, when I'm driving late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of something in the woods off the side of the road. A face, a shape, something just barely there. And I always wonder if I had stayed by that fire a little longer, if I had waited just a few minutes more, would they have come closer? Would I have ever made it back? I'm a 27-year-old woman from Southern Oregon, and this happened last fall. At the time, I had just started living full-time out of a converted cargo van. It had been a dream of mine for years to live minimally, travel the back roads, wake up to different views every morning. I spent most of my time camping on public lands, way out in the forest or desert, far from towns or even other campers. It just always felt safer to me to be isolated. People cause problems, not nature. That night, I was somewhere deep in the Modoc National Forest. I had driven for hours down dirt roads without seeing another car. It was mid-October, and most travelers had already moved south for the winter, so I felt like I had the whole place to myself. Around late afternoon, I found a tiny, overgrown side road that led to a flat clearing surrounded by tall pine trees. It was perfect, secluded, quiet, and peaceful. I backed my van into a spot where I could easily pull out if needed, just a habit of mine. I leveled the van the best I could, cracked the side door for some fresh air, and started making dinner. The sky was already starting to turn orange and pink. It was chilly, but I liked it. No bugs, no heat, just crisp, fresh air and the sound of leaves rustling high up in the trees. After dinner, I lit a small campfire using the ring of rocks someone had left behind. I sat out there for a while, bundled up in a blanket, watching the stars come out. The forest felt so alive, yet so still at the same time. I could hear an owl off somewhere in the distance and the occasional creak of a tree swaying, but nothing else. No engines, no voices, no footsteps. Just the kind of solitude I loved. It must have been around 9 when I decided to put the fire out and turn in for the night. I made sure to fully douse the coals, locked all the doors to the van, and closed all the blackout curtains inside. The forest was so dark outside that it felt like the whole world ended just a few feet from the van. Normally, I have no trouble sleeping, especially after a day like that. But that night, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way the wind seemed to die down all at once, or the sudden absence of the owl calls I'd been hearing earlier. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I tried to brush it off and lay down on my bed in the back of the van, scrolling through my phone for a bit. I lost signal a while back, so I was just reading some old downloaded articles. About an hour in, as I was starting to doze off, I heard something. It wasn't loud, just a faint crunch, like a footstep on dry leaves. I sat up immediately, holding my breath. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But then I heard another step, and another, slow, deliberate, getting closer. I sat frozen, staring toward the side door of the van. There were no windows on that side, just thin metal separating me from whatever or whoever was out there. Then a light tap on the door, like the tip of a finger lightly knocking. Not forceful, not urgent, almost testing. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought whoever was outside could probably hear it. I stayed perfectly still, didn't move, didn't even breathe. Another tap, this time slightly louder. Then a voice, female, soft like a whisper carried on the wind. "Hello? Is someone in there?" I didn't answer. I didn't even twitch. Every instinct in me screamed not to respond. The woman spoke again, closer now. "Can you help me? My car broke down." Her tone was strange, too calm, almost rehearsed. Something about it didn't sit right with me. If someone was really stranded, alone in the middle of a national forest in the dark, they wouldn't sound like that. They'd be panicked, frantic, desperate, not eerily calm. I stayed quiet, barely daring to blink. After a long silence, I heard what sounded like footsteps moving away from the van. I waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes, maybe 5. Then I made the mistake of peeking out through a small gap in the curtains toward the front windshield. At first, I didn't see anything, but then movement. From behind a tree about 20 feet ahead, I saw a figure, a man, standing completely still, half hidden by the trunk, watching the van. I dropped the curtain and sat back, pulse racing. There was no way that woman was alone, and she wasn't looking for help. They were trying to lure me out. I reached down as quietly as I could and grabbed the small hatchet I kept under my bed. Not that it would do much if they tried to force their way in, but it made me feel slightly less helpless. I thought about starting the van and driving off, but that would require climbing into the front seat, right where they could see me, and I'd have to start it, shift it into drive, and get up enough speed not to get stuck. Not to mention my headlights would light me up like a Christmas tree. So I waited and waited. After about 20 minutes, there were no more sounds outside, no movement. But I didn't believe for a second they had left. I decided my best chance was to wait until dawn. I stayed awake the whole night, axe in hand, straining my ears for any sound over the endless pounding of my heart. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the first gray light of morning started filtering through the cracks in the curtains. I carefully moved into the driver's seat, started the van, and peeled out of there without even looking back. As I drove down the rough dirt trail, I passed by the tree where I had seen the man standing. There, carved into the bark, was a fresh symbol, something crudely scratched in with a knife, a circle with an X through it. I didn't stop to examine it. I didn't stop for anything. It took hours before I got back to a paved road, and even longer to find a town where I felt safe enough to pull over and catch my breath. I reported it to the nearest ranger station, but they said without a license plate or a description, there wasn't much they could do. They just advised me to be cautious and avoid isolated areas when camping alone. Since then, I'm still traveling in my van, but I don't camp deep in the woods by myself anymore. Sometimes the solitude you seek isn't the only thing out there watching you. If you would like to share your story, please email us. And don't forget to subscribe.